Appreciate it. And we've got, we are very fortunate to have a terrific slate of speakers this morning. And I want to be sure we have plenty of time for the disparity study. We also have the county's administrative officer, which is also delighted to have Ms. Rogers with us. And we'll hear from her in a moment. I think everybody's gotten the agenda. I thank Jasmine and Elizabeth for all their support, and Jasmine for getting things on SharePoint. And in particular, we are, there's a very information-filled PowerPoint that we got to everybody earlier this week. And as the commission's decided, given how time is tight and all the things we need to accomplish, we really appreciate having those PowerPoints because the information is collected in a great organized way. But the commission is we've all agreed we will read those in advance and get a little bit of an overview from the presenter, and then bring questions and comments, because we think that's the best use of the speaker's time and of the commission's time. So Jasmine, thank you for getting that out in advance. And for everyone who worked on that PowerPoint, thank you for that. One item of business before I turn it over to Ms. Rogers, and that is we need to approve the February 11, 2021 meeting minutes. Are there any additions, corrections, changes, or the like regarding those minutes that any commissioner wishes to offer? All right, hearing none, those minutes are approved. And without any further ado, and a person who literally needs no introduction, Ms. Rogers, we are delighted to have you here and are looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, and thank you so very much, Mr. Chair, commission members, and council member. We are so pleased to have the opportunity to join you again. I trust that your sessions have gone well. As I mentioned when I joined you for your first session, we have been working on our solid waste work group, which our time frames have overlapped in terms of our meetings. But today I'm so pleased to join you to discuss the county's small, minority, and women-owned business program operations, and also to share with you the findings of our recently completed disparity study, which looks retrospectively at the county's operations for the period of 2012 through December 2018. This study was initiated prior to the administration's beginning in December of 2018. But we are very, very appreciative because clearly looking back at operations gives us perspective from where we've started in December 2018, where we are now, and where we can go moving forward. Since the beginning of the administration, we have worked diligently to understand where we are in our small and minority business engagement and procurement practices as a county, and to determine what steps we need to take to address underutilization of the businesses and services available through our minority, women-owned business community. Our goal is to become a best practice jurisdiction in this area of work, as well as in all operations of county government. That is a goal that the county executive and I share, that we want to become a best practice county and promote excellence in governance. Clearly, the small and minority business space is one of those areas that we are focused on. It was referenced in the transition plan, and it is indeed a part of our countywide strategic plan. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Carla Tucker, who is a manager, and I'll say manager extraordinaire for the county's minority, disadvantaged, and small business programs, and Mr. Troy Williams, our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, who will share perspectives on the county's current efforts regarding our move to move the county forward in diversity and inclusion globally, but particularly in this space. Our efforts are included in Goal 3 of the strategic plan. And by the way, we're very pleased that the Enterprise Strategic Plan is the first enterprise strategic plan that the county has ever had. This particular goal is equitable decision making, which focuses on ensuring that as a county, we make equitable decisions, provide opportunities, and allocate resources through an equity diversion lens that enhances growth and prosperity. And that's within the government, in our operations, and also in our engagement with the community. Mr. Williams will talk more about our diversity and inclusion efforts related to this topic and our path forward a little later in the presentation. We are very pleased to have with us today Dr. Eleanor Mason Ramsey, who is the president of Mason Tillman Associates and project manager for our study. Dr. Ramsey directs the firm's disparity studies. She is a national expert in the field of disparity studies with more than 30 years of experience and having successfully managed 148 unchallenged disparity studies for jurisdictions across the nation. I might add that they were completed on time and within budget. Dr. Ramsey has also designed and evaluated minority and women-owned enterprise programs for special districts, cities, transportation departments, public schools, airports, counties, and states. So she has indeed been a valuable partner in this effort. Her knowledge of these equity programs allows her to formulate effective public outreach and programs and community engagements, resulting in greater awareness and consensus and increased minority and women-owned business participation. As I said, she's provided incredible insight to us throughout the course of the study, and we look forward to beginning to implement these study's recommendations. You are the first group to, besides the county executive and senior staff here in the government, you are the first group to hear the recommendations. The report will be posted on our website today, and a public announcement about the study will be presented. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ramsey, and again, thank her for just the diligent work. Despite the pandemic, we completed the study, and the findings are quite telling, but there is good news at the end of this story in terms of where we can go. So Dr. Ramsey?
Thank you very much, Ms. Rogers. A good morning, all. It is with my pleasure that we have come to the juncture where we can, in fact, present to you the findings from the study that we have conducted for Baltimore County. And so this morning, I want to start by just giving you an overview of the scope of what we were charged to do. And that would provide you with a description of our study team. And I might note that we were very pleased to have with us on this venture a number of local businesses who assisted us in the performance of our work. And so our local consultants were Laronia Josie and Associates, as well as Keller Professional Services, Quality Compliance and Management. All of these, the three firms, assisted us in performing our work. And we were very fortunate to work under the supervision of Carla Tucker, who guided us through this process and enabled us to identify and collect the data that we will discuss with you today. So the purpose of our study is to determine if MWBEs, minority and women business enterprises, were statistically significantly underutilized in the award of the county's contracts, studying both prime contracts and subcontracts that were awarded during the period July 1, 2012 to June 30th, 27. As been noted, a retrospective look at the contracting activities of the county. And within that analysis, we were able to divide your contracts into 4 categories: construction, architectural and engineering being 2, professional services, which did not include architectural and engineering, and goods and services. And so those were the 4 industries into which we divided the contracts that we studied. And we also looked at the award of these contracts to groups, both 6 different ethnic groups. We looked at those contractors who were businesses owned by African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Caucasian females, and a group that we defined as non-minority males, which included Caucasian males, employee-owned companies, corporations. And so those were the groups into which the contractors who received these prime contracts and subcontracts were divided. And once we did that, we were able to also analyze the businesses that were available to perform the contracts that were awarded by the county. And it's in that particular analysis that we then calculated businesses that were willing and able to do their business. And based on the analysis of contracts awarded and contractors available to do your work, we were able to produce an analysis of what we are going to call dollars lost. And so within that, we were taking your study period, which again is July 1, 2012 to June 30th, 2017, and then calculated the total dollars that were awarded during that period, and essentially $1.6 billion. And then we looked at the total dollars awarded to the group of non-minority males, and they received 91% of those prime contracts awarded during that time period. And based on the availability of non-minority males in your market area, they should have received 38.52% of those dollars. And so effectively, dollars lost to non-minority males, which would be the various ethnic groups as well as Caucasian women, for 52%. The dollars the county awarded additionally should have gone to those groups. And from that, we then looked at the various industries in which the minorities and women performed contracts. And effectively, what we have done before you now is to take that information and identify the minority businesses, which included both women and men. And then from that, we broke out the women. So you basically, there's an overlap between those two, but it shows you what the women lost and what the minority groups combined, women and men, lost. And then at the bottom of this table, what we have done is to have each of the groups uniquely present. So the women and men are treated as one group. And so the total dollars lost by African Americans represents the dollars that both African American men and women, when combined as one group, are lost. And so you see therein a distribution of the dollars that should have gone to those groups based on a rather straightforward formula that's set forth in the decision that the Supreme Court issued on the 23rd of January, 1989, when it effectively said that what is expected is that local governments should award contracts to minorities They didn't speak to women because it was not a matter before them, but effectively to minorities. And in all disparity studies, one looks at women, but they should be awarded dollars based on their availability, their willing presence in the market area of the government. And that's what defines expected dollars. And then the actual dollars awarded is calculated based on what the local government spent and the ethnicity and gender of those prime contractors with whom they spent their dollars and the subcontractors used by those prime contractors. So that's the basic principle that was used when determining the dollars lost. So I think it's informative, though, to look at the size of the contracts that the county awarded during the period of our analysis. And what you see from this presentation, that the overwhelming majority of the contracts awarded, and if looking at the last column entitled total, the overwhelming majority of the dollars awarded by the county during this 5-year period were under $250,000. So effectively, the county's contracts were relatively small, and 28% of those contracts were actually under $5,000. So in terms of opportunities available for prime contractors, regardless to the race or gender of those contractors, was quite significant. There were a lot of relatively small contracts, albeit the contracts, as you'll note from this next slide, were awarded to essentially a very small set of those contractors that were available. So for construction prime contracts, there were 477 prime contracts awarded. The number of businesses that were awarded one or more of those contracts was 159 businesses. But as you note below, 20 vendors received 70% of the dollars. And again, noting that the dollars awarded were relatively small. So 70% of all of the dollars that were spent during that 5-year period were received by 20 vendors. And that is in fact the basis on which you see what was described earlier as the expected dollars were going not distributed across the groups as represented by their availability, but reflected that a very small subset of all of the vendors received most of the dollars. Architectural and engineering has a similar pattern. There were 188 contracts awarded during that time period to prime contractors in the design field, and the total businesses utilized were 77. And of that 77, 15 businesses received 71% of all of the dollars. In turn, the professional service contracts there were more of them, 169 businesses, and of that 169 businesses, 19 businesses received 70% of all of the contract dollars. A similar pattern in the award of goods and service contracts. There you had 2,648 contracts. A total of 855 businesses received one or more of those contracts, and 67 of those businesses received 70% of the dollars. That gives you an appreciation for the level of award of the contract. And from that analysis is what is said to be the disparity assessment or the disparity analysis. And again, the court has indicated, the Supreme Court in its decision in 1989 effectively established the paradigm for doing this analysis. And it requires an analysis of actual dollars, which I've just discussed with you. And it then asks to define the percent of those dollars awarded to each ethnic group, which is called utilization. And then each ethnic group's availability in the marketplace has to be defined. And your marketplace was defined as the county and the city of Baltimore. And within those two jurisdictions, it was necessary to enumerate businesses that were willing and able to do the county's work. And therefore, this, as illustrated here, African Americans, 27.47% of all of the businesses available in those two counties, willing and able to do your business, they were expected to receive $283,224 based on the percent that they represented of the whole and the dollars that were spent under 25,000 in this instance for construction services. And then you move forward and you look at the difference between the expected dollars and the actual dollars. And they should be at parity. And if not at parity, you look to see if it is overutilized or underutilized. And in this instance, the group is underutilized. And because the model that the court has given us is to answer the question whether ethnic groups are underutilized, and if so, is it at a statistically significant level? And as illustrated here, it is in fact the case that the African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Caucasian females were underutilized at a statistically significant level. Contracts for construction valued at 25,000 and under. So that pattern of analysis is applied to each of the groups, and we applied it at the informal level as illustrated in the under $25,000 level. That same pattern is applied to, that is illustrated when we move forward and look at professional services. You'll see again in the very last row the fact that there is a disparity, and you will also see in the very second column actual dollars, those dollars that that particular group received at that dollar level. And the pattern is consistent when you move to goods and services as well. And so again, looking at each ethnic group's actual dollars received, that percentage it represents of their award of the total contract dollars, and then their availability, which varies by industry since it is a count of businesses available in each industry to perform work and being willing, both willing and able to do so. And then looking at the expected dollars and the dollars lost. And so that is the pattern that's applied in the analysis of the contracts under 25,000. We also, addressing the concern that the court has expressed in Croson, in which it said the businesses should be both willing and able, that those that are enumerated for the analysis should be both willing and able. Subsequent courts, federal courts have addressed the issue of the ability or capacity as it is known. And it has led to discussions about ensuring that the businesses counted can perform the work of the agencies being analyzed. And that has given rise to various methods of assessing ability. And so in our work, we used a number of strategies to assess ability. One, we looked at size of contracts, because the size of your contracts dictate the capacity needed to perform them. So as we indicated earlier, in the distribution by size, the overwhelming majority of your contracts are under $250,000. So we did that. We also looked at the contracts that were successfully awarded to women and people of color to indicate what the demonstrated capacity has been for those contractors who were successful in receiving a contract. We did, in addition, a capacity analysis in which we did an assessment of the profile of businesses owned by people of color as well as non-minority males to determine what the profile was, how similarly situated were minority businesses when compared to non-minority businesses. So we did that. And then ultimately, we did an analysis to identify outliers in your data set, and we removed those contracts, which were outliers, your very large contracts from the analysis. And so what you see now is our analysis, which caps each of the industries based on the removal of the outliers from the study. And so we did address the issue of capacity. And so here you see for construction, these contracts are capped. And again, we have a disparity as illustrated by those numbers. When we move on to architectural and engineering, the design contracts, again, we have a cap and we still show the presence of a disparity. And professional services, we capped those contracts as well to ensure that we were addressing issues of capacity. And again, those contracts showed that there was a disparity for each of the ethnic groups and for Caucasian females. And goods and services, equally limited in the size of the contract subject to the analysis, showed again a disparity. As noted earlier, we looked at both prime and subcontracts, and the distinction is made by the court in what they describe as active discrimination, those decisions made by the agency, in this case the county, when it made a selection of a vendor. They were in control of that process, and the court described that when there is an underutilization that is statistically significant, they describe that as active discrimination. But they also recognize in that decision that there are processes, procurement methods in which the prime contractor makes decisions about the vendors that receive the county's money. And in that process, the court referred to it as passive discrimination in the presence of a statistically significant underutilization. And so we did an analysis of passive discrimination, which effectively is an analysis of subcontracts awarded by the prime contractors during this study period. And so you see here the outcome of that analysis. Our subcontractor analysis did construction and professional services. And we then did a very extensive process of reconstructing the subcontracts, some of which we found in the records the county had. Some of them were actually tracked in the prison systems that the county uses. And in others, we sought to get the most comprehensive data set by reaching out to the prime contractors additionally to try to ensure that we identified all contracts, those reported to the county in order to meet the requirements of the program, and others that did not come to the attention of the county. So this is based on a very extensive and detailed data collection process and analysis. And so here you see the outcome for construction subcontracts, again, the decisions made by the prime contractors. And here you have a disparity for African Americans, Asian Americans were statistically significant underutilization. And you had Caucasian females whose utilization was less than the availability. It was not statistically significant, but women are subject to a different standard because Croson did not address women. It therefore left them to an intermediate standard of scrutiny. So their underutilization, where it is not statistically significant, is still eligible for a remedy that would address it through the use of goals. And engineering, architecture, engineering, and other professional services, we combined in doing the analysis based on the availability of the data. It was a more reasonable way to approach that, noting that the decisions and the procurement process is essentially the same for both professional services and architectural and engineering. But here you see that there was a disparity for African Americans and for Hispanic Americans. And women not only were underutilized, but that underutilization was statistically significant in this particular instance. So that represents our statistical findings. Those findings are useful because it provides you a basis to employ race in the award of your contracts, because the court said that in order to apply race in the selection process, you must have a finding for minority businesses of statistically significant underutilization. And that finding was definitely evident in the research that we did. As noted at the beginning of our presentation this morning, there have been many endeavors by the county in the last 2 years in which this work was done that has had a very positive impact on changing the manner in which contracting is done and the outcome from that. But before talking about our recommendations, I want to just note some of the accomplishments that have been made under the leadership of the Minority and Small Business Marketing Manager, Ms. Tucker, who has in fact been active in setting goals on a contract by contract basis, and importantly has been effective in implementing MWBE compliance so that the standards applied at the time of contract award are actually executed throughout the life of the contract. And it's that diligence that makes a difference when one has an aggressive program to have meaningful compliance. And so that is a very integral part of the new process and demonstrated in the outcomes that you will hear about later this morning. And the procedures manual has been drafted, which provides a way to standardize the decisions made in the procurement process across the county, as well as their economic benefit factors to determine the impact of contracting on the local community. And data management systems have been enhanced. PRISM is the system that was used when we were able to, from which we were able to retrieve data. But that system is currently in the process of being made more robust so that it will track and monitor through the life of the contract. Solicitations are being advertised systematically and very broadly. And so there have been program changes, which I think are commendable. Definitely an indication that there is a commitment in the county to excellence and excellence in this particular process, which I think is laudable. And I think I know we are very proud as a consultant to be working with a client that takes this matter seriously and moves to address those barriers and to institute programs that are responsive to the commitments that are made when these programs are established. We did have some remedies or recommendations that we have offered that have been given consideration by the county. And one of the recommendations is to address the disparity that's been documented at the prime contract level. Those recommendations are limited by the constraints of the law, but there are some options that are available. And one for the prime contracts are to be able to use bid discounts and preference points in the awarding process. And so it is our recommendation that for construction and goods and services contracts, which are bid, that there would be a bid discount that would be applied. for those groups that had a disparity. And effectively, at the time that bids are evaluated, the discount would be applied to the bid that was submitted, that would discount that bid by the percent of the bid discount. And the person's ranking then would be ranked based on the discounted price. And if indeed an eligible group, if the bidder was from one of the eligible groups that was deemed to be the lowest bidder after applying the discount, the contract awarded to that company would be the full value of their bid. It would not reflect the bid discount. And that would apply to contracts bid both for construction and goods and services. On the other hand, on the professional service contracts, or those contracts where the procurement method is either a bid or, a proposal or qualifications, a different method is being proposed to address the disparities that have been identified, and those disparities attributed in part to discriminatory practices in both the award of contracts, but in access to various resources. And so there we are proposing that you use incentive credits. So a percent of the 100% evaluation points that might be available would be afforded to those companies that were eligible. And thus in the case of architectural and engineering and professional services, that the African American, Hispanic, and Asian and female businesses would be the only groups eligible for those percentage points. So some 8 to 10 points could be assigned to those groups, and the available points would be anywhere between 90 to 95, depending on the evaluation points that are afforded, and they would be available to all businesses. But these businesses that have been adversely affected in the process of the awards of the county during that 5-year period would be offset by having incentive points applied in the evaluation process. On the subcontracting side of the house, the decisions that are made, we think, should be reflected in a goals which would be applied to prime contracts when the solicitation is advertised, and the goals that are available to you are up to and including the percent that businesses are available in the marketplace. We'll need to make a decision administratively as you advertise contracts, what goals are appropriate to the contract based on the scope of work and the availability of businesses to do that work. But we've given you some benchmarks that you can use for setting those goals. But as been noted in the current activities of the Minority Business Office, that it is going to be absolutely essential, once those goals are set in a solicitation, that those goals are met by the prime contractors that are found to be responsible and responsive bidders. And if not, there is a waiver provision called good faith effort, which the court says must be made available. But in the applying that in the instances where a prime contractor failed to meet the goal, but submitted their good faith effort documentation, it must be rigorously reviewed to ensure that all good faith efforts were undertaken to meet that goal. Otherwise, the bidder that fails to meet the goal would be found non-responsive and would be disqualified from further review in that process. So it is a very rigorous process that must be applied, and it is a process that requires sufficient staff in order to be able to do the work that is necessary in order to maintain the integrity of the program. And then that leads us to some of our recommendations. And the one that we think is absolutely essential for consideration is to augment the staff so it is sufficient, both in terms of numbers and skill set, to provide the services necessary to have a rigorous program which is well monitored, reported, and is effective. And so we have laid out what we think are some of the profiles of the skills and abilities that are necessary to do the job, particularly in this new environment, which has become very much an electronic environment, a digital environment, and where the nature of business formation has changed considerably. Businesses now are doing business from a computer, and it is different from brick and mortar that has characterized business for the last many decades. So there's a new day, a new way, and adequate staff is important to be able to manage and support this program. We also think that there needs to be an evaluation of the capital construction pre-qualification requirements. There is the use of pre-qualifications, which we think warrants further review because of the manner in which those persons who are on the pre-qualification committee make the decisions about who are pre-qualified, in turn make the decisions about the companies. I might note that the pre-qualification process is one where businesses get pre-qualified based on a set of criteria. They are then put into a pool, and as contracts come available in construction, those businesses are assigned a project without further competition. And the pre-qualification committee determines who goes onto that list, and they determine who gets selected and assigned a project. And so we think that that process needs to be reconsidered because so very many of the county's contracts, and particularly their smaller contracts, are become under the control of a limited number of businesses. And if those contracts were in fact open competition or provided in a sheltered market for the businesses targeted to participate, you would have a greater utilization and a more equitable distribution of contracts across the pool of available businesses. So we think that that is a program that is worthy of further consideration. And once doing that, we think then that you could put in place a sheltered market program. And that sheltered market program could have a form of pre-qualification, but it would be open, and it would also be aligned with the size of the contracts and the distribution of projects to those businesses in the sheltered market would be on a rotational basis, and that would move the subjectivity from the process of determining who would receive contracts once they are on a list of pre-qualified firms. There are prompt payment provisions, which obviously have a great benefit to businesses to know that invoices that are not in dispute will be handled in a timely fashion. And if in dispute, the business will be informed of that upon immediate review of the invoice so that they know that there are issues that they need to address. So invoice dispute procedures are also being proposed so that it formalizes that process and establishes a time frame for identifying disputed invoices as well as addressing and resolving the disputes. Their system-wide training to establish the program with its modified and enhanced components is important so that there is uniformity across the organization. It should be the case that a individual business owner could call the county, and anyone that picks up the phone in the county should be able to direct that business to the appropriate office and understand what it might mean if they call to ask about the county's minority business program. And part of enhancing the use of businesses is to expand knowledge about the program more broadly into your market area. So we're encouraging a continuation and support of the ongoing program of outreach, targeted outreach that will invite businesses into the county, get more submissions, and changing your process and enhancing the procurement methods should be itself a demonstration of the openness of the county, and that should increase the numbers. So we also think that you can modify your change order and amendment requirements, again, to facilitate access for all businesses. So I think that it is our finding that there is a very aggressive program that is currently being employed. We think that those additional enhancements might bring about even more effective use of the minority and women businesses, as well as non-minority businesses in the marketplace who want to do business with you, both small and large. And then we believe in using your PRISM system to maximize its efficiency. You can have effective monitoring, tracking, and reporting of your actual utilization. And with that, I'd like to turn the program back over to Mrs. Rogers, and thank you for affording us an opportunity to perform this very important study for the county, and to let you know that in our experience, the efforts that have been made since the study began are commendable and rather unique in our experience to have a client who has moved so proactively to modify its procurement methods and its outreach and its accountability to facilitate access to your contracts by all businesses that are willing and able to do the county's work. And thank you very much, and stay safe all.
Dr. Ramsey, thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I would ask if you would like to pause for questions here or continue with the presentations, because we do have the data on what Dr. Ramsey mentioned about the 2 years. We did additional analysis and vetted it with Dr. Ramsey in terms of some changes we've made since the beginning of the administration. And Ms. Tucker was just going to briefly share those. They were not in, the data findings weren't necessarily in the larger PowerPoint, but we will proceed as you see fit.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Ramsey, thank you for your and your team's work on that disparity study. It does give us a lot to talk about and address. I would think it might be helpful if we can get the brief description of the data for the last couple of years. And as long as Dr. Ramsey is available to us, why don't we get that information first, then open up for some questions. And obviously want to hear from Mr. Williams too, but why don't we get that information first?
Sure. Well, again, I will turn it over to Ms. Tucker, who I say is phenomenal, because literally Ms. Tucker had been operating as a one-woman show. And some of the changes that have been made, I arrived in April of 2019, and Ms. Tucker had made movement toward some activities that, as Dr. Ramsey indicated, have really demonstrated with focus, setting of expectations, changing some of our processes that have been in place for many years, and moving to more industry best practices. You see movement. And so we're really pleased, and we were glad that Dr. Ramsey and her team could validate that for us, that the efforts we've taken so far have helped us to move the needle, but we are looking to move the needle even further based on the recommendations. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Tucker to present some key updates of what has occurred over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Madam CEO, as well as the chair and the commission. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to briefly go over, can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Briefly go over just a few key points, some policy changes that have taken place in Baltimore County. Let me put on a slideshow, sorry. Some brief policy changes, and then Jasmine Clemens will speak to the findings of what has taken place since these policy changes have taken effect. So what we've done in Baltimore County since I'd say 2017, we've incorporated the program of the Maryland Small Business Financing Authority, which is a program that the state of Maryland has that addresses the surety bonding issues in an effort to get participation from minority and women-owned businesses in the county's construction arena. It was my understanding or my thought that having that bonding capacity would be able to allow them to get pre-qualified with the county, to assist with pre-qualification. So this language goes out in every solicitation that actually has bonding requirements. We've addressed the prime contracting, tried to address the prime contracting issues. So now a minority or women-owned business that is that either affirms itself as a minority or women-owned business or is certified can count up to 50% of the current subcontracting goal in the county contracts. We've incorporated a small business purchase program. The intent of this program was to allow small businesses to participate at the prime contract level. And I'll kind of go over that in a moment on the lessons learned on that. So we had the intent of having that limited to small certified firms, but we didn't specify that in the solicitation process, so that it created somewhat of a problem. So we had to modify that in the middle of the program, or in the beginning of the program rather. We incorporated economic benefit factor, where trying to address capacity issues of the small businesses. And these are some of the race neutral measures. So it's not enough that it may be that they need funding, but they may have also needed staffing. So we incorporated the Baltimore County's Economic and Workforce Development's First Source Hiring Program into the solicitation language. So if a contractor had hiring needs, they could opt at their own voluntary will to use Baltimore County's Economic Workforce Development for their hiring needs. In our economic benefit factor criteria, we also assign points if they were using a Baltimore County and or Maryland located firm as their subcontractor, the MBE WBE subcontractor. So in an effort to try to drive traffic to Baltimore County firms that are certified and located within or located in Maryland. And also try to get an idea of were they supporting any local nonprofit organizations that may have been servicing Baltimore County. And we actually had a contractor that responded to an RFP and said, there is no economic benefit to Baltimore County. So that was evidence that we needed to assign that criteria to economic benefit factor. In October of 2020, we implemented a federally mandated disadvantaged business enterprise program. Those firms are also certified by the Maryland Department of Transportation, and we are limited to that certification for that particular program. As far as construction related, in 2017, my office worked with Baltimore County Department of Public Works, and we modified the pre-qualification program where we now allow private sector work experience to be considered in that process, where private sector work was not considered previously. And we also now allow the work experience of the principal officers to be considered for new businesses, and that was not allowed previously as well. Just a brief, as I mentioned, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, it was implemented in 2020, and we have to follow the federal regulations for that. This program goes through the procurement review group, just like the WBE program does. We have goals, we present it to the procurement review group, and then it is applied to and advertised. The race neutral measure, as I mentioned, the Small Business Purchase Program, we use the Baltimore County's Minority Business and Women's Business Enterprise Programs Executive Order to actually generate this race neutral program, because in that executive order, we were already given the authority to divide procurements into smaller procurements. So in doing so, we created a race neutral measure for that prime contracting opportunity where MBE, WBE primes could count up to 50% of the goal, but we advertised it with the intent of advertising to small businesses. This was to focus on the trades contracts, the on-call trades contracts. What we found early on was that we put out that this program would be broken down into tiers at the agency level, but it wasn't practical when we put it into practice. So what we in turn had to do was look at the spend of the contract term for the prior term and find a break point where we could tier the contract into up to 2 tiers. The intent was the first tier would be no MBE, WBE participation, just to give them an opportunity to get their foot in the door and start doing business with Baltimore County. What we did not do was we did not limit tier 1 to the sheltered markets. So in turn, they were still competing against the same businesses that they were already competing against when we didn't have the tiering process. So what we had, once we found that out, what we found was that companies that were doing business with Baltimore County already, that were familiar with the processes, they already knew that the term contracts were small dollar purchases. So they began bidding on tier 1. And then they kind of stopped bidding on tier 2 because tier 2 was all contracts that were over $25,000 and it had MBE participation. So that was going to put Baltimore County in a passive discrimination process. So we stopped tiering on construction contracts, but we continue to do the tiering process in the professional services under architecture and engineering. Because under the architecture and engineering process, and that was the lesson learned where we had to change almost immediately out the gate. Under architecture and engineering, the dollar threshold was always above $25,000, regardless of the tier. So that is our bid threshold for establishing goals and contracts. So we continue to include MBE, WBE participation on architectural engineering projects, in both tiers. So we continue that practice today in architecture and engineering, but not in construction. In our accomplishments in the professional services and tiering, we actually were able to identify 18 new businesses in that process that hadn't done business with the county before. Of the 18, 8 were MDOT certified or Maryland Department of Transportation certified. 5 were MBE, 3 were WBE. 2 of the 8 were located within Baltimore County, and an additional 2 were located within Maryland. And another accomplishment that we have, we are actually monitoring the participation on our first development project in Baltimore County, which is the Trade Point contract. And we've already discussed some of the these first few penalties Dr. Ramsey addressed, the manual she addressed, and the economic benefit factor. But since 2018, the current administration established the county's new prevailing wage bill that took effect in 2021. In 2020, we implemented the DBE program. The county's supply diversity website was created. So now we have a single landing page for the supply diversity, and then it breaks out into MBE, WBE, and then DBE separately from that website. And we did some benchmarking with national contract compliance models to see where we could expand the use of PRISM to track the first source hiring and to track prompt payment and things like that. So we're working on that now. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine to speak to the dollars recently attained.
Thanks, Carla. So, hi, everyone. As I think the commission knows, one of the many hats that I would wear if it fit on my head is connecting our data-informed decision-making through BC Stat with everything else we do across government. So one of the I've been working with them a lot, and Carla in procurement, and we've spoken to this in prior meetings. There are challenges with pulling data from the existing system that I hope will be remedied when we move to Workday. And I think there's opportunities to figure out simplification until then. But so because of all that, what Dr. Ramsey and her team did in the study in breaking out by category, it's a really manual process, which is why they were paid to do the study. So for BCStat, and for the sake of this presentation, we looked at all expenditures across all of procurement, the direct orders and purchase orders, so all the county spending. We couldn't do it by category just because that would take weeks, potentially months, to sort out and match, just like Dr. Ramsey. But across all spending in the same time period from 2012, but we added on since the CE and Madam CAO came on. We've improved, and this is prior to the study results and recommendations. So everything that Madam CAO and Carla and team had put into place, we've already achieved a 59% improvement in disbursements to certified MBWE firms. So that doesn't include those that aren't certified, but we just match it against the MDOT list for ease. So as you can see, we've spoken to this as well. Last year, there were, I would say, potentially a record number of procurements due to the COVID emergency. So even that going, and maybe concerns I think I've heard voiced about emergency procurements, we still achieved over 10%. And I think that's amazing considering the climate. And we just started, we're not even through first quarter of well, actually, I take it back, this is fiscal year. So the fiscal year, we're tracking up as well. You can go to the next slide as well. So this is just looking at the master agreements and that decision making. So that's a 38% improvement. We're increasing the number of new MBWEs that are added. This has been asked about before, and you can see the breakout by category, the growth and who's been, seeking and being awarded in our administration. So I think this is something to be really, really proud of, the work they've been able to do without the results of the study. And I think with the recommendations of the study and this commission, I'm not exaggerating that the sky is pretty limitless. So.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Were you finished, Jasmine? There we go. Okay.
Mr. Chair, do you want Mr. Williams to go on and do his presentation?
Yes, if we could have again, and I just want to say for the entire commission, this is this set of slides is a tremendous amount of information in here, and we really appreciate having it in advance. So yes, if Mr. Williams would like to give us a brief overview, that'd be great. Then we can open it up for questions. Why don't we do that? And then I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. So if Mr. Williams would like to proceed, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I just want to speak to you real briefly about where we are headed with respect to the MBE program. And to do that, I wanted to first take a quick step back and just kind of look at the historical development of the program. And there's just a few key points that I wanted to point out on this slide. First of all, since the county has been involved and had an MBE program since 1983, this slide illustrates that most of that program growth and advancement has occurred through the use of executive orders, which is really a demonstrable leadership commitment, but it also has a tendency to foster a little bit less certainty with respect to program continuity and prioritization. The change of an administration under executive orders could certainly change the prioritization of the work. So it's just something to be noted. Additionally, with respect to organizational changes that are noted in the timeline, you'll see that in 2010, the county disbanded its Fair Practices Office. And in 2015, it also had the resignation of its MWBE officer. Both of those developments kind of created and compromised a bit of the operational efficiencies in the program and placed greater compliance and outreach responsibilities on the MBE business unit, specifically the marketing manager. And then the final piece to note on this particular slide is the implementation of the 2010 executive order, which we have referred to earlier, which really places responsibility for MBE, WBE program compliance at the departmental level. And that's really important as it relates to the objectives of this administration, because we are keenly focused on trying to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion considerations across the enterprise. Next slide. So how does that align with the strategic frameworks that we are using as an administration? The county's transition report identified a need to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in all its government functions, as you can see is indicated by point 1 on this particular slide. And as such, I was hired in 2019 to come on board and serve as the County Chief Diversity Officer. And since that time, we've been really busy in trying to develop a robust and comprehensive Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that takes a comprehensive approach to civil rights, human rights, and diversity and equity inclusion issues. And in accordance with that, we've also found our nexus on point 6 with the MBE WBE office, which is to identify and implement strategies for greater economic inclusion for all residents. And so we found that common ground of advocacy for ensuring that all segments of our community are fully included in economic development. And Carla Tucker and I have been working very closely over the past year to ensure that that is reflected in the MBE WBE area. Next slide. So that's the transition report. And I won't go into all the great detail of this particular slide, but how does it relate with respect to the overall strategic plan that Madam CAO spoke of earlier? And if you take a look at this chart that I've provided, I've tried to outline the relevant goals within the strategic plan that also touch MBE, WBE concerns, highlighted the key strategies that the county is going to pursue to fulfill these goals, and then try to outline for you a nexus of activities between the MWBE office and the DEI office. And so just as an example, if you look at our wheelhouse, which is goal number 3, equitable decision making, and you'll see that one of the key strategies there is very focused on economic viability. And if you take a look in that third column, you'll see that the county has already brought a DEI lens to a lot of this work. A lot of those items that are starred in the chart have either been implemented or are ongoing, including such activities as this disparity study, this procurement panel, and the development of data dashboards that Jasmine just talked about, which also feed into goal number 5 of our strategic plan, government accountability and transparency. Carla spoke to you earlier about the implementation of our new supplier diversity webpage, which will continue to grow and expand. We also have looked at working with government reform and accountability to track our specific outcomes as it relates to MBE, WBE. And of course, as has been noted several times this morning, the expansion of the PRISM system will further expand our ability to report both up the chain of command and to monitor our work at the departmental level. Next slide. So what are some of our key activities and initiatives moving forward coming out of the recommendations of the report and the work that we've been doing to kind of reorganize ourselves over the past year? The first of which is organizational realignment. The DEI office will continue to advance diversity broadly, but we feel as though the focused advocacy that is pursued by the MBE, the Supplier to Diversity Division, as it is so named now, is critically important to our comprehensive approach to this work. So as of February 22nd, we have issued a decision memo that will begin the process of moving the MBE-WB office into the area of the DEI office. And so we are looking forward to supporting that work and being able to kind of coordinate and collaborate those synergies more effectively. We've talked about augmented staffing models. For you, you see a proposed organizational chart for what the MBE office will look like at the end of the coming years. It's a multi-year plan to get this personnel in place, but we have placed a priority, particularly in the area of compliance and supplementing our staffing in that particular area. So we do have a tier request in on our current budget cycle to bring 2 personnel on to support Ms. Tucker and her staff's work with respect to program compliance. Additionally, in an effort to kind of magnify and amplify our ability to ensure compliance at the departmental level, we would like to pursue the reinstitution of our small business departmental liaison program, designating individuals within each department to serve as the small business liaisons to ensure reporting and tracking of compliance issues around MBE, WBE at the departmental level. Next slide. And then finally, in some other areas where we're looking to move forward with respect to training initiatives, we're looking to incorporate supplier diversity training into all of our current and future diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings across the enterprise. We already addressed a number of issues to include EEO, cultural competency, and diversity, equity, and inclusion awareness, and we think that it'll be critically important to include supplier diversity issues in those trainings. We will update the MWBE program manual and make it available enterprise-wide and also on the website. Train all departmental small business liaisons in the PRISM compliance tool. Folks have spoken to you about software system expansion. We are fully committed to that, expanding that PRISM system and including all modules so that we can take full advantage of that system in our tracking and compliance activities. And then with respect to some other areas with respect to legislation, we would like to collaborate with the Office of Law to advance statutory MWBE goals that benchmark us with surrounding jurisdictions. Again, kind of harkening back to the lack of permanency that you find in executive orders, we think that some legislative approaches may help create some more permanency around the program. To include advocating for prompt payment legislation that mirrors the federal DBE program. And then finally, I think as someone touched upon earlier, we want the county to continue to expand its use of virtual services to deliver procurement and business resources to our constituents. I think we've had a tremendous opportunity to learn how to deliver government through this COVID period. And so we want to continue with those efficiencies that we've identified during that period. And with that, Madam CAO, I will turn it back over to you.
And Mr. Chair, we are open to questions. As you can see, we took this head on at the start of the administration, and we're just very, very pleased that we now have the results of the study to help us even further define our path forward. And I'm pleased that the DEI office and the proposed movement of the small business program under the DEI office, that operation will report directly to me. So you have the top down leadership piece that Dr. Ramsey talks about. And this is an area that I've worked on in many of my tours of duties.
No, I think that bodes well for the county and everyone. And thank you to all presenters. Are there questions from the commissioners?
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
I have
Council.
Thank you. I actually have a number of questions, and the first one deals with on-call contractors. Is there a minority participation requirement when the list of on-call contractors is developed? Actually, what happens is a on-call contractor, proposed on-call contractor is given to the council. We approve it or disapprove it. And is minority participation part of that vote? In other words, is that requirement considered?
I can speak to that. For all contracts over 25,000, it must be submitted to the procurement review group for determination. So if the contract value is exceeding $25,000, MBE participation is being considered. It is looked at on a contract by contract basis. So it actually depends on the value of the contract, if it's going to be feasible to assign a goal. But in most cases, there are goals assigned to it. So it would depend on the actual contract that we're looking at in the group. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
it would show up in the CARF as well.
So
Okay.
are most of the on-call contracts, they're prime contracts. Of those prime contracts, what percent of them would be minority businesses?
It actually depends on the scope of services that's being called out in the solicitation. That's why it's looked at on a case-by-case basis. So with the exception of architectural engineering. Architectural engineering, the current executive order allows us to assign a goal by classification. So due to staffing, we assigned a 20% goal for architectural engineering. So theirs always comes through for at 20%. It's always a 20% goal because of staffing. We don't have the staff to be able to look at that on top of the other contracts that we're reviewing.
So if an
Catch.
yeah, I just really quickly, if there is an architectural contract that it does not meet your 20% goal, let's say it's 15% or 10%, can that contract still be approved to send to the council?
If they meet the good faith effort requirements. So when
Gotcha.
if they submit their good faith effort and we review that, then if let's say they said contractors were not available, we have to actually contact those contractors to ensure that they really were not available. If they said that they were not available and they filled out the forms that were necessary, then yes, they could be approved at a waiver.
Would you say that on-call contractors, for the most part, have on the average, have a lower minority participation than the other contracts that are awarded through the different systems?
I don't understand what you mean by lower.
What I mean is, okay, so we
sorry.
have, okay, so in general, the on-call contractors have a certain, each one has a certain percent of minority contractors, or maybe they are a minority contract. Okay, we just saw a study of the potential business that could go to minority businesses, and the end result was that there's a lot of money out there that did not go to the minority businesses. Would you say that the gap for on-call contractors is higher or lower?
So the percentage that we are assigning on a contract by contract basis is for subcontracting. What
Okay.
the disparity study was showing was primarily prime contracting. So there's a difference in it's not apples and oranges. So it depends. At the prime contracting level, I would recommend that something needs to be done to increase the number of prime minority and women businesses to increase those dollars awarded, right, by the county. The subcontracting, in order for them to be considered, they have to submit that as part of their joint venture team, they have to tell us who their MBE, WBE firms are at the time we are reviewing their qualifications.
And I would agree with you 100% after looking at some of the numbers and knowing as little as I do about on-call contractors. For the statistics that were in the report in the beginning, there was a statement made that I found confusing. The study was done of minority contractors, subcontractors that existed in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. And I believe I heard that. And my question is, if you just looked at the potential in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, let's say that a Carroll County minority business was, a prime contractor or was part of it was a subcontractor, a Carroll County business. Would that have showed up in the statistics, or because it's not Baltimore City, Baltimore County, that would have been not looked at all?
The
We
answer
can
is
defer to Dr. Ramsey on that one.
yes. Two parts of that. When we looked at the contracts that were awarded, we identified the ethnicity and gender of all prime contractors. So we did not limit it to any geographic area. So your
Oh, okay.
report that describes the dollars spent with each ethnic group is based on the ethnicity of that awarded contractor. On the other side of it, however, when we determine what was expected to be awarded to each ethnic group, that was based on an enumeration of businesses within Baltimore City and Baltimore County. But your use is an actual account of every business that received a contract as either prime or a sub. And we did a very rigorous effort to identify ethnicity and gender because it was not limited to just businesses certified. So we actually had to research each business to determine its ethnicity and gender.
Do you
Councilmember
think?
Cat,
Sure.
I want to
Casey?
get to a little piece though that you're talking about, because I want you to know that we are digging deeper. We had started digging deeper on the utilization of subcontractors, because you have minority contractor prime, but then you have subcontractors and you have multiple contractors who are often awarded on contracts. And what has been reported to us, that there is a disparity in the business or the task orders that go out to the various contractors. And we have looked at that. The director of DPW has looked at that with respect to paving. We're looking at that when it comes to snow removal. We're looking at that a number of things. Are there barriers there that are causing a situation where someone will be awarded but not receive a task order? So that's a part of it too, because the monies, they could be awarded, but if they don't receive task orders and can complete the task and be paid, then they're on board for that contract that shows them as a sub, but they don't get paid. And so we're trying to remove any kind of barriers, any kind of procedural steps in the decision making about how task orders are issued. So there's equity there. We received a couple reports of that, so it caused us to look deeper at the data in terms of the actual task order. Because one thing to approve it, but the next thing is looking at who actually ends up getting the task orders, doing the work that will result in them receiving payment from the county. So we're looking at that too, which could be a part of the challenge. These were observations that were brought to us by some minority contractors that we've had discussions with. I've personally been in those discussions.
Yeah, I could see with the presentation of the report, et cetera, that there were definitely holes, and I appreciate the efforts to come up with recommendations that would help to give us a clear picture, but on top of it, to get more involvement from minority contractors and subcontractors. This with a preferred contractor or subcontractor. Subcontractors aren't preferred though, are they? It's just the contractors, the prime contractors.
Are you referring to pre-qualification?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Right.
Right. Any vendor can apply for pre-qualification. It's just whether or not, it doesn't matter what their ethnicity or certification is. It's just a matter of whether or not they meet the criteria.
Okay, so if I'm a prime contractor that has met the criteria, if I bid on a contract, and what does that mean for me? That if I'm the lowest bidder, that I'm automatically going to get the contract because I'm in essence pre-qualified and happen to be the lowest bidder?
That I have to defer to a procurement professional. I'm not a procurement. I'm not on that
Okay.
side.
And on that note, just want to be mindful of the time. And I can tell you, Ms. Tucker, and I expect Mr. Williams, we will enjoy hearing from you further again, because this is a very important topic, obviously, and there's a lot to cover here. While we have Dr. Ramsey and Madam CAO and everybody here, are there other questions? We will have, and one second. I want to just be sure we leave ourselves about 15 minutes at least. I think we can cover what we need to in the last part of this meeting then. So if there are other questions, and I saw Pete, you had a question, Pete, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I want to echo what Mr. Catch noticed, and I think, and we took some notes here. It looks like the disparity study included Baltimore County and Baltimore City for the availability of MBEs. So I don't understand then why Carroll County, Harford County, Howard County, and Anne Arundel County may not have been included, since they're also peripheral to Baltimore County. And it seems to me that over the years in dealing with MBE contractors, the majority of them are in portions of Baltimore County and Baltimore City. So by not including the other peripheral counties, you're actually skewing the numbers to more availability than what there really is.
I think it's an excellent question. The guidance for determining the market area comes from the Croson decision. And in that decision, what is being asked is to determine to follow the dollars. And so you're looking at where the majority of the dollars your agency spends. So in this case, we looked at where the majority of the dollars were spent by Baltimore County. And then within that jurisdiction, we then sought to identify not just minority businesses, but non-minority businesses and Caucasian female businesses. But it is not, it is driven by the actual expenditures of the agency.
This is Carla. To maybe help Peter out, Dr. Ramsey, when you looked at certified firms, did you look at certified MBE firms in Baltimore City based on their certification list, or just was it Baltimore City certification program that you found the certified MBEs, or did you look at something else?
No, the pursuit of businesses was not defined by certification. Certification was a source. We had the Associated General Contractors, we had the road builders, we had the Chambers of Commerce, we had various and sundry trade associations. So it was a comprehensive view of the businesses available. Within that, once we enumerated businesses from those various lists, the next question that we had to ask, if the business did not come from a government list, whether the business was willing to do business with the county. Those businesses that verified their willingness, they then were included in the data set. And from that point, we had to define the ethnicity and gender of each of the businesses willing to do business that did not come from a government list where willingness had been confirmed.
Okay, I guess I saw that in some of the information that was provided. just to help out Mr. Plack, for Baltimore City's MBE program, the jurisdictions do include Carroll, Anne Arundel, Howard. So in some form or fashion, those businesses have been mixed in the pot based on her disparity study. And we know that Baltimore County uses both MDOT and Baltimore City certification lists. So Baltimore City certification list includes all those, it includes 7 jurisdictions. So they are included in some way, form, or fashion, be it on providing solicitation information as an MBE and possibly in the disparity study. I think maybe if I'm correct, what came out was when it came to who got the contracts, it was a little bit tighter. That's the way I understand it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Peter. Thank you. Yes, Peter.
I just in the response to that, it's just, I think I would like to see a little bit more definition on what was called availability.
Yeah.
I think that's where my confusion is.
I can chime in on that. It's actually defined in the full study, which is like over 200 pages. So as soon as that is live on the webpage, I can send it to you because it breaks it down, how they, formulated that.
That'd be helpful. Peter, you got a question? I think you're muted. Peter, I think you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Sure.
In terms of the implications of the study, let's look at just A&E services. Are we to surmise that a 20% goal is or is not adequate, and or that it's just the implementation of the firms achieving the goal? In other words, is 20% a good number? The numbers from the diversity study would indicate it's not a good number. So then that would be, two places that the system has to be tweaked.
Well, the what we have provided you in the study would be your ceiling, the maximum goal that could be set on a subcontract. So we're offering you that. We're also offering you procedures that we think can positively give you a positive outcome in this process. And the earlier conversation about the on-call contracts is a very good example of an area where improvement in that process we think can give you an outcome. What is notable about an on-call contract as a procurement method, the goals are often set for the prime, but then the prime gets a series of individual projects, and the prime then decides who works on that individual project, so that the goal, while it's present, may never be affected in terms of how the prime assigns work on the projects. So rethinking that method, putting those contracts in a sheltered market where businesses can compete, where it's not predetermined what limited number of prime contractors will have control, I think could make a difference in bringing about a greater participation.
So if I could.
Sure.
I've got a bunch of questions, but I don't think I'm going to get through any of them really in any depth. When looking at the procurement vehicles, particularly procurement vehicles that we're using as piggyback, procurement vehicles where we're doing IDIQ, procurement vehicles where we are perhaps leveraging a state contract. I see particularly in IT related contracts. What were there any specific findings as it related to those piggyback contracts or our IDIQ type contracts in the county and levels of disparity? Also, are there contracts where we know we may have, particularly from a prime perspective, we may have a diverse pool However, my sense is that even with that diversity, it's a high likelihood that if I had 10 firms on the contract, one minority, that one minority is probably getting less than the others. I may be wrong, but was anything specifically done to look at situations like that?
Yeah, I think that the evidence on the professional service as well as the architectural and engineering services supports the notion that there is not equity in the award of contracts using the indefinite quantity contracts for one. Cooperative agreements also indicate, again, there's not an application of the program because it's basically selecting a contract from the state list without regard to being able to define what you can select based on ethnicity and gender of the vendor, but you don't control the procurement process. So that is an issue. And then it comes back again to the use of the on-call contracts, which is a significant spend. And it does, while it may have a broad award in terms of the actual use of contractors, it is a decision that's made by managers as opposed to the procurement process itself.
Yeah.
So I think you're right.
No, thank you. I had another question. It's a curiosity. When I looked at the statistic that you showed, and this is probably, and I do think that there have been some significant changes over the last 2 years that are positive. One thing that stuck out to me in the last chart that you were showing in terms of the current administration, where it's an improvement, about a 5-point improvement. But it was interesting to me, it looked like white females were a significant piece of that the statistics that you shared. Did I miss that?
Yeah, that was Jasmine, but yes, that was my read of that table as well.
Okay. And our focus, do we need, I know you break down, and you suggested that we break down ethnicities and ethnic groups, but you said right now, because of CROSN, it does not deal with women-owned businesses. Is there a recommendation for us and how we look at that when we're really looking at our numbers? Should we be reporting that as part of our success?
Yes. It is our recommendation that the reporting out of utilization should be by ethnic group, and it should be by gender within each of those ethnic groups. And women should therefore be reported as Caucasian females as well as each of the ethnic groups.
Okay.
So that you can get a truer picture of what the spend actually is.
You shared a chart with staffing recommendations. Does that, and you saw what Mr. Williams has put together, would you consider that, moving to that as a best-in-class organization in comparison to some of the others that you've worked with?
Yes, I think that the recommendations for program modifications that have been presented are very progressive, and I think can achieve the outcomes that the county would like, which I have presumed to be equity defined by your awarding of contracts to businesses based on their availability in the marketplace. And so, yes, I think those programs can achieve that.
I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to stop because I know I'm not monopolized. Just one more, if I could.
You get one more, and then I think we will stop there. But please go ahead.
So, from a model perspective, have you seen other jurisdictions or organizations who look at taking the responsibility for achieving goals down to department levels?
Yes, and there is an increased emphasis now in reporting out the performance by departments, both in terms of achieving goals, in terms of prompt payment of invoices, since it really begins at that level, in terms of outreach and expectation that managers participate in the outreach process and presentations, and that the managers make themselves available for businesses to make presentations to them. So on all of those levels, there has been a move to bring it to the department level for purposes of accounting for the outcome that is expressed in the statistics.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair, I'd like to
Phil,
add
can
one
I ask a
comment
brief
to the-
question?
Okay.
Phil, Scott
Yeah.
did ask one in reference to the increase in the women, and the drastic increase in the women, which seems with most of these diversity and MBE, WBE set-asides or programs, women tend to do better than African Americans, in particular, and Asians. And so the question is, in this drastic increase, did individuals who work within those departments go back to look at whether or not these companies were created or changed from male, white male to female? That's one quick question. And a couple questions I can ask in the subcommittee. And then the second question for the consultant, did they look at every agency within Baltimore County? I think you have your properties or who deal with recreation and parks, housing and planning, every department other than like DPW and other agencies.
I can chime in on the first question about the increase in that. So these are MDOT certified firms. And so their certification process is what we follow. So I would have to get more details. I don't know if Carla knows about how do they go back and check for ownership transfers, but these are those that are certified through the state.
So that's certified through the state, not the local
Right.
Baltimore City
Yeah,
that includes
this analysis was MDOT certified.
Okay. And last question as relates to the new structure that potentially is going to be put in place. How will that impact? Because I know based on the study and trying to cultivate opportunities for companies that I've worked with over the last X amount of years, I was not surprised, particularly for the African American and particularly in professional service, architectural engineering services. But staff, how will the staff of these various agencies, because one of the criticisms that I constantly hear about Baltimore County is that, of course, you make changes at the executive level, but those changes are stated to those people who work with the procurement and DPW and other, but they don't necessarily abide by that. You know, how's that going to be monitored, you know, with these changes? And will there be changes within those departments as well?
Anybody want to take that one?
I can address.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I can address it to some degree in terms of our planning to kind of roll out departmental training and to really kind of drive that level of awareness down to the departmental level, combined with the small business liaisons. I think they'll work really closely with Carla, and we'll create accountability systems to ensure that the department is effectuating the changes that we want effectively. So I think, you know, just trying to change culture and raise awareness is going to be critical to those efforts.
I think that's something the MBE subcommittee can look at more deeply, but thank you for that. Okay,
and Phil, real quick, in reference to that subcommittee meeting, I was going to ask Carla, is it possible we can invite Troy and maybe Miss Dr. Ramsey, if possible, to that meeting? Because that way myself, Scott, Miss Mayor Dixon, and a couple other people, we can kind of go deeper and talk about some of those things. But you're right, Carla, a lot of this information helped to answer some of the, thank you.
I thought so.
Yeah, and you know, to the rest of it, because Petra and I were, you know, talking about some things, so it was very helpful. So now we can kind of get into the weeds of what we'd like to see as far as recommendations and things. So thank you very much. Thank you, Phil.
Sure. And Madam CEO, I think you were going to say something. I want to be sure to give you that opportunity, and then I want to carve out a little bit of time for the commission business.
I was just going to say, based on goal setting, right now, Carla has had to do the lion's share of goal setting as a one-woman operation. But we know within PRISM, there is an automated goal setting tool that was always available, but the county did not elect to buy that module. We are incorporating that module because that is best practice. That's best in class. I mean, entities all over the country use an automated tool that has an algorithm there to help, you measure apples for apples when you're goal setting. And unfortunately, the county had not done that. So I am, I have identified the funds to purchase the modules that we need, the compliance modules plus the goal setting modules. We will have the full complement available through PRISM that heretofore we have not.
Congratulations. That is wonderful news.
But I'm
Yes.
familiar with PRISM, so I'm like,
I-
why are
yeah.
we using Abacus to do
Right.
this when there are tools out there that give you the capacity to do it in a best in class kind of way? And that's where we're moving, so that increase and enhancement in PRISM encompasses that module.
Yes,
Correct.
it's a great system. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam CEO, for that. And Dr. Ramsey and Ms. Tucker and Ms. Clemens, Mr. Williams, thank you very much for your presentations. It was very informative. It's great to have all the written materials. We'll look forward to having an opportunity to look at the disparity report when it's released a little later today. And this has been very helpful. So my thanks to all of you. And we will then move to item 3 on the agenda, which is commission business.
Well, we'll
Thank
sign
you
off.
very much and good
All right.
afternoon. All right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey.
Thank you.
Two items. Obviously, there's a lot to digest there. The fact that we've got active subcommittees is a great thing. So there are 2 bullet items on the commission business point, and I do think we can cover them in the next couple of minutes. The first is I want to have another meeting, and I'm suggesting 2 weeks from today, March 25th. A number of commissioners have suggested that it would be helpful to have a meeting in the afternoon. The meeting may be set for just 90 minutes. I haven't quite sorted that out. It depends on who might be available to come speak. But at that meeting, I would like to hear from the subcommittees who I hope will have met by then. And I know MPE is scheduled to meet next week. Construction has met, and Steve and his group have put together a very detailed outline. And I think it'll be very helpful for the other commissioners to hear about that. And I also want us to focus at this March 25th meeting on what I'm going to call public outreach. We need to hear from stakeholders. We need to figure out the best way to do that. We'll have some suggestions that the commission can discuss, so we can see if we can get something in late April, at a late April meeting scheduled, so we can start hearing from stakeholders. It may well be, and I'd like everybody to, once they have a disparity study, it may well be maybe we'd like to have Ms. Tucker, Mr. Williams, or someone back on March 25th. I think we'll take our lead from the MBE subcommittee, which will be meeting next week, but we'll hear their report, and we can talk through that. I have circulated the most recent list, I think a few days ago, maybe last week. Rick, the only addition at the moment is Rick Benetti, who was not able to be on the call today because of something in Annapolis. Rick is asked to join the construction committee, so he is on that committee. There are a couple committees that we haven't completely populated yet, one of which is sustainability. And right now it's Commissioner Morheim, who could be a committee of one, but I would like to have some other people volunteer. And if not, have some ideas of who might participate. We want to get that one up and running, and every committee's got at least 2 people. Some have more, and that's an important one. So if you are interested, you can speak up now. You can send me an email. But there we go, Carly. Great, thank you. We will we'll get a list together and get that moving forward.
If I can, Phil, on that,
Please.
if Jasmine or whoever can, I'll try and set up a meeting. Thank you, Carla. I was feeling lonely. Appreciate it. But to have either Steve Lafferty or whoever is in charge of sustainability, since we haven't actually had a presentation on it, if we have a subcommittee meeting, we could at least catch up. So we don't need a full presentation, but maybe Carla and I will get our calendars together, and you could get somebody from the county who could give us sort of a mini briefing, so that we're not just working in a vacuum, which is where we are now. I mean, we both have ideas, I'm sure, but that would be helpful for me at least.
It would be helpful for me as well, because when I talked to Steve Lafferty, his responsibility around sustainability was totally different from mine. I was thinking more around the green. Mayor Dixon, you're greener, cleaner. I mean, really, I was thinking more around that, and that's not, his wasn't around that. So, Dan, you and I can talk about it, but I'm really on that whole lowering the carbon footprint, the whole cleaner, greener piece. I've learned a lot over the since coming on board with Mayor Dixon's staff and even beyond, and doing some other work. So that's the piece I'm looking at, is how you can lower that carbon footprint.
So this is Elizabeth. I just want to chime in, and it may have been flagged. We are in the process of, Steve has been moved over to the Department of Planning. He's now our Director of Planning, and we are actively recruiting, and will hopefully be appointing a new person to the role, I would say by the end of April, if not sooner. So I don't know. I don't know how to play it out. There will be a new person. I mean, there have been interviews. It's not like I'm just saying that, we're well on our way to making a hire, but we are in a transition in that role, although it will be filled before this commission wraps up.
Really, I'm just asking, maybe Steve can, I understand his position and all that, but maybe just give us a half hour. Even though he's Director of Planning, he didn't lose his memory about what was going on in sustainability. So, just let him give us a half hour of bring us up to date of what he was working on, and Carla has her ideas. PETA and I have exchanged some materials on this topic as well, and I have some of my own knowledge from, and I know Wade does too, but from legislative days. But we're just asking for not a huge thing. Even if she chatted with us for a little bit would be nice. Mm-hmm. Not asking to put a whole program together, just, talk with us for 30 minutes, give us a thumbnail of what he was doing.
By chance, does the county exec have any type of initiatives that he's looking at from a sustainability process, and maybe we can, utilize that, or, whoever that department would have reported to? Is there anything out there around that?
So what we'll do is we'll collect up. I'm sorry.
There is a lot of aspirational stuff from, that's okay. I'll tell you what I know, and then you can correct me, Elizabeth. There is a lot of aspirational materials that I've seen, but they don't translate into specific detailed policies. And they're from about a year and a half ago when the county executive came in. They're all excellent. The question would be, like this. Well, we all want MBE. Now, did we actually achieve it? We want sustainability. What did we actually do? What are the specific detailed policies? And as Sheila Dixon said, that go down to the purchasing and planning level, the staff level, who are making decisions, and are they including it in their discussion? So that's sort of what I see there. I'll share that with you.
And also in the strategic plan, there's sustainability. So that will be more current than the transition report.
If you have some more, Jasmine, send it to me, please.
Excuse me, send what? I missed that. I'm sorry.
For Jasmine, referred to.
Strategic plan.
Oh, okay. What we'll do is we'll regroup offline. I'll check in with Steve. I know there's some other initiatives that have gotten more traction than what might have been presented publicly. It will be helpful for the input that you might share on certain points to be shared with the new person. I just want to, give them a chance to get on board, and there may be follow-up, I would say, later in the summer. So we'll definitely get back to you in short order as the subcommittee kicks off. Thank you both.
Thank you.
It's great. Thank you, and thank you, guys. All right, so March 25, I'm envisioning mostly business meeting, maybe 90 minutes. We may, though, want to follow up on this particular, we will want to follow up on today's discussion, whether it's then or another time. I also want us to focus on stakeholders, public input, and I've talked to Elizabeth and Jasmine a little bit about maybe hearing some things about data collection, whether that happens at that meeting or not. We'll get that set up, and I will keep everybody posted in the meantime. But
what time are you looking at that afternoon? Do you have a
2
time?
o'clock. It's on the agenda. 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
Sure. So anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? Yes, Steve.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. One thing I gathered from today's presentation is the overlapping of the material from a variety of groups. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting in the final exercise of putting a report together on what recommendations come from what group. So I guess unless you have some better direction for us, we'll do our best. We'll at the committee level, and we'll discuss and put things down in proposed recommendations to the broader committee. But it certainly between the MBE group, the construction group, and the equity group, I mean, it's a lot of overlap. So we'll do our best, I'm sure.
No question about that, and that's a great point, and that's something I think we should talk about at this March 25th meeting as part of the commission business and the whole subject of subcommittees. The other thing is I went back and looked at the executive order, and I think the chair of the commission can appoint a coordination czar, and I don't know, Steve, your name might be at the top of that list. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Anything else from anybody? I can't wait till we can all meet in person. Thank you all for your efforts. It's terrific. Pleasure serving with you. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.